There are places in England where history does not fade, it waits, and among them, one stands silent still. Blackthorn Hall, nestled in the chalk-dusted hills of Kent, where the yew trees twist, as though remembering something the land itself would rather forget. The manor, though grand in its Palladian symmetry and fine sash windows, had long cast a pall over the village of Ashwick, not because of ruin. It remained impeccably kept, its ivy-clad facade glowing amber in autumn, its gravel drive swept clean by unseen hands, but because of absence. No laughter echoed from its upper windows, no footfall disturbed the gravel after dusk. The servants, when seen idle, moved with the brittle precision of clockwork figures, never meeting the eye, never speaking, beyond necessity. The whole belonged to Lord Eleanor Winthrop, a gentleman of unimpeachable lineage, whose name appeared regularly in the quarterly gazettes for his patronage of the arts and his quiet support of the church. Yet those who knew him, socializos who had sat across from him at dinner in London or taken tea in his conservatory, spoke of a man whose civility was so perfect as to feel rehearsed, whose smile never quite reached the eyes that lingered too long on empty corners. It was in the winter of 1872 that the first whispers began, not of scandal, but of silence. The Winthrops had a daughter, Eleanor, born in the spring of '58, whose name had once appeared in society columns as a debutante of uncommon grace, accomplished on the pianoforte, fluent in French and Italian, with auburn hair that caught the candlelight like polished copper. Neighbors recalled her walks through the frost-laced gardens, her voice soft as she read poetry to the old vicar's wife, her laughter once described as a bell heard faintly through snow. But by the close of '71, Eleanor Winthrop vanished from public view. No illness was cited, no marriage arranged. The family physician, Dr. Pembroke, issued only a terse note to the local registrar. Miss Winthrop remains in delicate health, confinement advised. Letters to friends ceased, portraits were removed from the main gallery. Even the village postmaster, a man privy to the comings and goings of every household for 20 miles, could not recall the last time a letter bore her handwriting. Yet the most unsettling detail not remarked upon until much later was the timing. Eleanor disappeared precisely 1 month after the death of her mother, Lady Cecilia, whose passing was itself shrouded in oddity. Though the obituary cited consumption of the lungs, the undertaker's ledger noted no signs of the usual deterioration. Indeed, Lady Cecilia's hands were described as cool but unblemished, as if merely asleep. More curiously, the family declined a public funeral, opting instead for a private interment at dawn, attended only by Lord Winthrop and 2 silent footmen. The grave, in the overgrown churchyard behind St. Alt, bore no headstone for 3 full years, and when one finally appeared, it was plain, bearing only her initials, and the dates. Nothing of her virtues, nothing of her name in full. Villagers muttered that Lord Winthrop could not bear the weight of grief, but others, particularly the older women, who still kept the old ways in their hearts, spoke in hushed tones of unquiet spirits and vows made in desperation. Blackthorn Hall, meanwhile, changed. The eastern wing, whence Eleanor's domain, with its sunlit music room and lavender-scented boudoir, was shuttered. Dust sheets draped the furniture, not as a prelude to renovation, but as a shroud. The grand piano, a broadwood that had once filled the house with sonatas and nocturnes, fell silent. Yet on certain still nights, when the wind dropped and the moon hung low over the beech woods, servants claimed to hear faint notes drifting through the corridor's melodies, half fragmented, like a lullaby played backward. They dismissed it as the groaning of old timbers, the sigh of a house settling into its bones. But Mrs. Hargreaves, who served as housekeeper from '68 to '82, later confessed to a cousin that she once found a music sheet on the floor outside the locked east wing door. Though no one had entered the room in months, the page was damp, as if held in trembling hands, and bore only a single phrase in pencil, smudged but legible: "He promised I would not be alone." The truth remained veiled behind propriety and privilege, the twin pillars of Victorian decorum that shielded so many secrets. Lord Winthrop continued his public duties, funded the restoration of the vicarage, and even donated a stained-glass window to the church depicting St. Cecilia with her lyre. But those who saw him closely noticed a tightening around his mouth, a habit of touching the signet ring on his left hand as though reassuring himself of its presence, and always, His gaze avoided the eastern wing. Ye, Irs, Baseb. Ye, Ars Baseb. The village grew accustomed to the Winthrops' silence, folding it into the fabric of local lore as one might a peculiar weather pattern or a stubborn patch of fog that never lifted from the river bend. Blackthorn Hall, with its immaculate lawns and immaculate secrets, became less a home than a monument to what no one could say. But monuments, as the ancients knew, are not always erected to honor the dead. Sometimes they are built to contain them.
The first tangible rupture in the silence came not from the family, nor from the village, but from a tradesman's invoice, dated April 1873, discovered decades later tucked inside a ledger of household expenditures at the Kent County Archives. It was issued by Harrow & Sons, Masons of Canterbury, for structural reinforcement of interior partitions, East Wing, Blackthorn Hall, along with provision of lime mortar. Bricks hand-formed, unmarked, and labored 3 men. 4 days. No other renovations were recorded that year. The hall required none. The bill was paid in full, in coin, with no accompanying correspondence. What unsettled researchers was not merely the expense, but the specificity. Interior partitions do not require reinforcement unless they are to bear unexpected weight or conceal unexpected space. More telling still were the fragments recovered from the Winthrop family solicitor's office after it was liquidated in 1901. Among bundles of dowry agreements and land transfers lay a sheaf of letters from Eleanor Winthrop, dated between January and March of 1870 to her final months of acknowledged existence. They were addressed to Miss Lydia Thorne, a childhood friend residing in Bath, and though superficially mundane discussions of botany, requests for sheet music, inquiries after mutual acquaintances, their tone curdled as the months progressed. Early entries spoke of Papa's renewed affection since Mama's passing and the comfort of routine, but by February, phrases began to fray at the edges. "I find myself watched even in sleep," she wrote. "The walls grow closer each night, though no one has moved a single piece of furniture." In her last extant letter, dated March 14th, the script trembled. "He says it is for my protection, that the world outside would not understand my condition. But I am not ill, Lydia. I am not mad. I hear her singing in the walls." The letter was never posted. It was found folded inside a hollowed-out volume of Keats, hidden behind a false panel in the library, a discovery made only when we're clearing the house after Lord Winthrop's death in 1899. Dislodged a loose shelf locale testimony, gathered piecemeal by antiquarians in the early 20th century, corroborated a growing unease. Old Tom Bellwether, who as a boy delivered milk to the hall's scullery door, recalled that after Lady Cecilia's funeral the household staff shrank by half. "Gone overnight," he said in a recorded interview of 1923. Sacks packed, wages paid in silver, told not to look back. Those who remained spoke rarely. Cook, a stout woman named Mrs. Pike, was seen weeping in the vegetable garden one twilight, clutching a silver locket that, when later sold at auction, contained not a portrait but a lock of fine auburn hair tied with black ribbon. The village schoolmaster, Mr. Elwood, remembered that Eleanor had once tutored local children in French. After her withdrawal, several pupils claimed to have seen a pale face at the East Wing's upper window, though the shutters were always closed. When questioned, Lord Winthrop dismissed it as refraction of light through aged glass, yet he ordered the sash. Windows there permanently sealed with lead flat, measure unusual for a room supposedly unused. Perhaps the most disquieting artifact emerged from the estate's own records. A single entry in the stable's ledger, dated May 1872, noting the disposal of Miss Winthrop's mare due to sudden lameness. But the groom's son, interviewed in 1910, recalled no injury, only that the horse had been led away at midnight, riderless, its bridle still bearing the scent of lavender water, Eleanor's favorite. More ominously, the animal was never seen again, and no carcass was ever recovered for rendering. In rural Kent, such disappearances were noted. Livestock did not vanish without trace, unless taken by human design. Then there were the sounds, not the phantom piano notes, those were dismissed as fancy, but the knocking, not random, not the rattle of loose slates or settling beams, but rhythmic 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, a pattern repeated with metronomic precision. The housekeeper's log from 1873 records, a complaint from the scullery maid, dismissed as hysterics, but in the margin, in Lord Winthrop's own hand, a terse addendum ceased after the 17th of June. Thank God, no explanation followed. Later, neighbors reported similar sounds emanating faintly from the hall's eastern flank on windless nights steady, patient, as if someone were counting the hours. One farmhand, returning late from market, swore he pressed his ear to the hall's outer stone and heard, beneath the tapping, a woman humming not a tune, but a single sustained note, wavering like a candle flame in draught. Most damning of all was what was absent: no death certificate for Eleanor Winthrop, no burial record, no will, no mention in her father's testament. In the eyes of law and church, she simply ceased to be a Victorian bureaucracy so meticulous in cataloguing births, marriages, and deaths, left no paper trail for her after March 1872. It was as though her very existence had been excised, not lost, but deliberately erased, line by careful line, as one might scrape ink from a page with a blade. Yet erasure implies something to remove, and in a house as meticulously documented as Blackthorn Hall, such a void could not be accidental. It was a silence carved with intent. By the 1880s, the story had faded into local mythamad heiress of Blackthorn, said to wander the corridors in a white nightgown, her fingers tracing the wallpaper. But myth often masks memory, and memory, as later investigators would learn, has a way of seeping through even the thickest walls.
The descent into certainty began not with revelation, but with repetition. In the autumn of 1899, following Lord Winthrop's death from what the coroner termed cardiac exhaustion, though the family physician noted an unusual rigidity in the jaw and hands, as if clenched against some final, silent protest, the estate passed to a distant cousin, Charles Winthrop, a barrister of little imagination and less sentiment. Unburdened by the unspoken pacts of his forebears, he commissioned a full survey of the Hall, intending either to modernize or sell. It was during this appraisal that the first physical anomaly surfaced, a discrepancy in the architectural plans. The original blueprints, drawn in 1821 by the celebrated firm of Nash and Wyatt, showed the east wing as a series of 4 contiguous chambers, yet the surveyor's measurements revealed a 5th space, an irregular cavity, roughly 7 feet by 4, sandwiched between the music room and the old nursery, inaccessible from any door or window. Its existence masked by double-aired lath and plaster. When questioned, the estate agent could offer no explanation. The builders, long deceased, left no notes, and the few remaining servants, now pensioned off or relocated, spoke only in riddles. Some rooms, one muttered, are meant to be forgotten. Then came the rain. A relentless downpour in the winter of 1900 caused a section of the east wing's interior wall to blister and weep, revealing not damp rot, but something far more unsettling. Beneath the floral damask wallpaper, a second layer of plaster bore faint in. When conservators carefully peeled back the surface, they uncovered a sequence of marks, vertical lines grouped in 5s, like tally counts, stretching over 6 feet of wall. Interspersed among them were words, etched with what appeared to be a fingernail or a pin. March, June. Still here, Mama, and, most chillingly, he hears me. The script varied in preciosum letters, deep and frantic, others so light they might have been drawn in sleep or despair. Carbon dating of the plaster would not be possible for another century, but the mortar's composition matched that used in the 1870s, precisely the period of Eleanor's disappearance. Coincidence might have explained one anomaly, even 2, but then the clocks were found, not in the cavity, remained sealed, deemed too structurally sensitive to breach without risking collapse, but in the attic above it, tucked inside a dust-choked trunk, lined with moth's wings and faded velvet, were 3 pocket watches, all stopped at different times, yet all bearing the Winthrop crest. One had belonged to Lady Cecilia, another to the family's former governess, who had resigned abruptly in 71. The third was engraved with Eleanor's initials. Each had been meticulously wound to full tension before being halted, suggesting not neglect, but ritual. Stranger still, when a horologist examined them decades later, he noted that all three had been stopped at moments when the minute and hour hands formed a perfect vertical line. 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and, in Eleanor's case, 3 a.m. The witching hour, the hour of deepest sleep, Teohur, when, according to folk belief, the veil between worlds grows thin. Then there were the acoustics. Engineers hired to assess the hall for electrical installation in 1905 reported an acoustic anomaly in the east wing, a persistent resonance at 187 Hz, a frequency known in later studies to induce feelings of unease, dread, or the sensation of a presence. Though the science was not yet understood, the workmen refused to linger past, claiming the air thickened near the sealed wall. One electrician, a pragmatic man named Briggs, recorded in his journal that while drilling a pilot hole near the nursery skirting, his bit struck something soft, not wood, not plaster, but fibrous, like aged cloth. When he withdrew it, the tip was stained a faint brown and carried the scent of dried lavender and something metallic, like old pennies. He did not report it, but he never returned to the hall. Patterns began to coalesce, not through grand gestures, but through absences and echoes. The Winthrop family had a long-standing tradition of commissioning death masks for immediate relatives, a practice dating to the Regency, yet no mask existed for Eleanor, nor for Lady Cecilia. Despite a high station, the family vault, when opened for Charles Winthrop's interment in 1912, contained only Lord Alistair's coffin. Lady Cecilia's was conspicuously absent. The vicar's burial register showed her name, but no plot number. It was as if her body, like her daughter's, had been unmade. And always, the music returned. In 1908, during a charity concert held in the hall's grand saloon to raise funds for its upkeep, a guest, a retired naval officer with perfect pitch, claimed to hear a Chopin nocturne drifting from the east wing during intermission. The piece, Op. 9, No. 2, was one Eleanor had been known to favor. When the staff investigated, they found all doors locked, all windows, yet the floorboards outside the sealed wall were damp, as if someone had recently stood there, barefoot, listening. By now, the story had seeped beyond Ashwick. Scholars of the occult, journalists hungry for sensation, and amateur antiquarians all circled Blackthorn Hall like moths around a guttering candle. None could prove anything, but proof, as the coming years would show, was not always necessary. What mattered was the weight of accumulated silence and the growing certainty that silence in T's house was not empty, it was occupied. It was Edgar Vane, a journalist of modest repute but obsessive temperament, who first treated the legend of Blackthorn Hall not as ghost story but as archival puzzle. A contributor to the Quarterly Review of Antiquarian Studies, Bonnie had spent years documenting suppressed histories, e-suicides, expunged from parish rolls, illegitimate heirs stricken from wills, women vanished into private asylums under the guise of nervous disorders. When he encountered a passing reference to Eleanor Winthrop in a footnote of a forgotten memoir by a Kentish clergyman, he sensed not tragedy, but coup. In the spring of 1914, weeks before the outbreak of war would drown all such curiosities in blood and noise, Vane secured permission to inspect the hall's remaining papers, then stored in the solicitor's vault in Maidstone. What he found was not a confession, but a lattice of erasures, account books with entire pages, correspondence bundles, missing key letters, the stubs still clinging to frayed ribbon. Most revealing was Lord Winthrop's private diary, a slim morocco-bound volume disguised among agricultural ledgers. Its entries from 1871 to 1873 were sparse. Clinical, Cecilia's condition worsens despite Dr. Pembroke's tinctures. Then, after her death, the vow must be kept. For her peace, for mine, no elaboration followed. But tucked between The pages for June 1872 was a pressed sprig of yew and a single sheet of notepaper, bearing a handwritten transcription of an older text medieval in diction, possibly Latin in origin, though rendered into archaic English. It read, "When the blood of the mother calls through the stone, the child must answer, or the house shall hunger." Below it, in Lord Winthrop's hand, "She sings in her sleep. It has begun." Vane, though rational by disposition, could not dismiss the cumulative force of the evidence. He tracked down surviving staff. The retired butler, now blind and living in a cottage near Dover, whispered that Lady Cecilia had not died of consumption, but of a wasting that came from within a grief with no name. The former stable-master, embittered by his abrupt dismissal, recalled that on the night of Eleanor's disappearance, Lord Winthrop had summoned masons after midnight and paced the east wing for hours, clutching a silver key that never opened any door we knew of. Most crucially, Vane located Miss Lydia Thorne, Eleanor's childhood friend, now a widow living in Cheltenham. Though elderly and frail, she remembered vividly the final unposted letter and something more. "Eleanor once told me," she confided, her voice thin as parchment, that her mother had spoken of an old custom in the family. When a daughter was born under a waning moon to a mother who had lost a child before, she was bound to the house, not in spirit, but in flesh, a living anchor to keep the past from rising. Lydia dismissed it then as a fever dream, but in hindsight, she wondered. Vane's obsession deepened as Europe descended into war, while others turned to trenches and telegrams. He burrowed into deeds, baptismal records, and obscure theological treatises. He discovered that the Winthrops had inherited Blackthorn Hall, not through direct male lineage, but through marriage to the Blackthorn, Aristocrat woman, who, in 1665, was accused but never tried of witchcraft after her infant twins vanished during the plague year. Local lore held that she had sealed their souls into the walls to spare them hell. The story, long dismissed as Puritan hysteria, now echoed with eerie resonance. Vane cross-referenced lunar charts. Eleanor had indeed been born on a waning moon, April 3rd, 1858, and Lady Cecilia, before Eleanor, had borne a son who died in infancy. A detail, scrubbed from all public genealogies, but preserved in a cryptic entry in the family Bible. "Our little Henry, taken by God's hand," 1855. The pieces aligned with dreadful symmetry, not madness, but belief, not cruelty, but conviction. Lord Winthrop had not imprisoned his daughter out of malice, but out of fidelity to a vow, to a tradition, to a terror older than reason, and the house, steeped in that belief, had become more than stone and timber. It had become an instrument. Vane compiled his findings into a manuscript titled The Silent Heiress, a study in patrician concealment, but publishers deemed it too speculative, too steeped in unverifiable folklore. The war swallowed public appetite for domestic mysteries. Disheartened but undeterred, Vane donated his notes to the Bodleian Library in 1921, where they gathered dust for decades until, in 1953, a young architectural historian named Miriam Croft, researching Victorian domestic confinement, stumbled upon them. She was struck not by the supernatural claims, but by the architectural anomalies. Using Vane's descriptions and the original Nash plans, she petitioned the current ONASA Consortium of Preservation permission to conduct a non-invasive scan of the East Wing. Ground-penetrating radar revealed the cavity. Yes, but also something else. Organic residue along the inner surface, consistent with prolonged human habitation. Hair, skin cells, breath, moisture, fossilized in lime. Croft's academic paper, published in 1957, caused a minor stir in archaeological circles, but little public notice, yet she could not let it rest. In her private journals, she wrote, "We assume walls are passive, but what if they remember? What if they listen?" She returned to Blackthorn Hall every autumn for the next 12 years, often staying alone in the West Wing. Neighbors reported seeing her at dawn, standing before the sealed wall, eyes closed, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. She died in 1971, never having married, never having published another word on the subject. Her personal effects included a cassette tape, unlabeled, recorded on the hall's grounds. When played decades later by a curious graduate student, it captured only wind and, beneath it, a faint, rhythmic, tapping 3 beats. Pause, to beats exactly as described in the 1870s. Obsession, it seemed, did not end with the obsessed. It seeped into the next listener, like a damp-through plaster. The final revelation arrived not through excavation, but through inheritance, not of property, but of silence. In 1989, during a routine conservation effort funded by the National Trust, a section of the East Wing's inner wall was carefully removed to address moisture damage, threatening the original wainscot. Behind the double layer of lath, conservators found not a hollow void, but a space lined with tightly fitted brickwork, sealed with a mortar, mixed with ash, and what forensic analysis later identified as human hair, auburn, consistent with known descriptions of Eleanor Winthrop's. The cavity, no larger than a confessional, contained no remains, no bones, no clothing, not even a shoe, but it held echoes in tangible form, a child's wooden music box, its mechanism rusted but intact, engraved with the initials, a single silk glove, yellowed with age, the fingers stained with what appeared to be ink, and, pressed into a crevice near the floor, a palm-sized shard of mirror, its silvering long tarnished to black. Most haunting was the wallpaper, not the floral damask of the outer chamber, but a second layer hand-painted in faded cobalt and ivory, with a repeating motif of caged birds. Each cage was subtly different. Some open, some locked, some with the bird turned away as if in sleep. In one corner, nearly obscured by grime, a phrase was inscribed in minuscule script, echoing the diary's medieval fragment, "The singer keeps the house from screaming." Yet the true revelation lay in what the space suggested, not what it contained. The bricks showed signs of having been laid from the inside, not built around a prisoner, but sealed by one. This was no mere cellet, was a sanctuary of last resort, constructed not to hide a daughter, but to protect the world from what she had become, or what she was meant to become. Cross-referencing Vane's transcribed fragment with obscure ecclesiastical manuscripts in the Lambeth Palace Library, a researcher finally traced the origin of the phrase, "The house shall hunger," to a suppressed strain of Anglo-Saxon folk theology in which certain bloodlines were believed to serve as wardens against ancestral unrest. When a mother died bearing such a burden, the duty passed to the next female heir, live or not. To break the line was to invite the dead to walk. To keep it was to offer a living tether. Lord Winthrop had not buried his daughter alive in cruelty, but in covenant. The delicate health was not illness, but vigil. The sealed wing was not a prison, but an altar, and the music those phantom nocturnes heard through the walls was not a cry for help, but a rite. In traditions predating Christianity, song was used to soothe restless spirits, to bind the threshold between worlds. Eleanor, trained from childhood in the precise tonalities of the piano, had been groomed not for society, but for service. Her mother's death had activated the vow, her disappearance, its fulfillment. The final piece came from a forgotten codicil in Lord Winthrop's will, discovered only in 2003 during a digitization project at the Kent Archives. It stipulated that upon his death, the East Wing must remain undisturbed until such time as the singing ceases. No explanation was given, but the implication was clear. As long as the house heard her, the barrier held, and if the singing stopped, whether through death, despair, or deliverance, then the hunger would return. This accounted for the stopped watches, not tokens of death, but markers of time suspended within the ritual. The tally marks on the wall were not pleas, but reckoning's days endured, duties performed, and the mirror shard. In folk practice, mirrors were often broken to prevent spirits from using them as portals. Yet here, it had been kept perhaps so she might remember she was still human, even as she became vessel. There was no grand climax, no unearthed corpse, no vengeful specter rising from the bricks. The horror lay in the willing sacrifice, the quiet complicity of love turned into ligature. Lord Winthrop had not been a monster. He had been a man who believed truly, desperately, that his daughter's suffering was the price of cosmic order, and Eleanor, perhaps, had believed it too. Her final words on the unposted letter, "He promised I would not be alone," took on new meaning, not a plea for rescue, but a statement of faith. He would listen, he would remember, and in that act of witness, she would not vanish. The truth, then, was not of murder, but of martyrdom sanctioned by blood, sealed in silence, sustained by song. And though Eleanor's body left no grave, her presence endured in the architecture of absence, in the resonance of a single note, in the chill of a sealed corridor, in the way the dust motes hung still in the east wing's air, as if waiting for the next phrase of a lullaby that never ended. Today, Blackthorn Hall stands open to the public on select afternoons from April to October, its rooms curated with the meticulous neutrality of the heritage industry. Velvet ropes guide visitors, past Chipendale chairs and porcelain cabinets. Audio guides recount anecdotes of fox hunts and frost fairs. The East Wing, however, remains closed. A discreet plaque reads, "Structural Instability Private Conservation Area." No mention is made of Eleanor Winthrop. Her name appears in no brochure, no exhibition panel, not even in the footnotes of the official guidebook, and yet she is the house's true curator. On still evenings, after the last coach departs, and the caretaker locks the gates, a certain quality of silence settles over the hall, not the absence of sound, but its concentration. The wind, which stirs the yew trees into whispering, seems to pause at the eastern gables. The light, as it slants through the tall windows at dusk, thickens near the sealed corridor, pooling like liquid amber on the floorboards. Visitors rarely notice, but those who linger, genuine, historian sensitive souls, or simply the wary, sometimes report a sensation of being gently observed, not with malice, but with a sorrow so deep it has become stillness. In the off-season, when frost feathers, the glass in the hall is empty for weeks at a time, the current custodian, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Elera, makes a quiet ritual of her own. Every third Thursday, she unlocks the West Wing's music room, dusts the keys of the restored Broadwood piano, and leaves a single white camellia on the bench. She does not play, se only sits and listens. She has never heard the knocking, but once, on a night so cold the pipes groaned like bones, she swore she felt the floor vibrate not with sound, but with breath. No one has attempted to breach the sealed cavity again. The National Trust, wary of both structural risk and metaphysical unease, has classified it as non-intervention heritage. Scholars debate whether Eleanor's confinement lasted weeks, months, or years. Some posit she died within days, her body secretly removed. Others suggest she lived far longer, sustained by narrow vents and silent deliveries of bread and water, her voice growing weaker until only the memory of melody remained. But the truth, if it exists, lies not in duration, but in devotion. She sang until she could not, and perhaps, in some dimension, folded into the grain of the oak and the grit of the mortar. She sings still. The final testament is auditory. In 2011, during an acoustic study of historic interiors, a team from Cambridge placed sensitive microphones throughout the hall to analyze resonance patterns. When reviewing the night recordings, they discovered an anomaly. At precisely 3 a.m., a faint harmonic emerged from the East Wing, not broadcast, not resonant, but localized, as if emanating from within the wall itself. Spectral analysis showed it matched the opening phrase of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Op. 9. No. 2, played at half-tempo, with a slight tremolo in the upper register, exactly as Eleanor was said to have played it in her youth. The researchers, though secular and rigorous, declined to publish the data. One later admitted in private correspondence that the sound did not fade, as recordings do, but seemed to withdraw like a voice stepping back into a room and closing the door. Blackthorn Hall endured, immaculate and inscrutable, its secret neither confirmed nor denied. Children on school tours laugh in the grand saloon, unaware that just beyond the baize-covered door, time is not measured in centuries, but in breaths, held and notes, sustained. And on certain nights, when the moon hangs low over the Kentish downs, and the world falls into its deepest hush, if one stands very still in the east corridor close enough to feel the chill rising through the floorboards, one might catch it, not a voice, not a song, but the ghost of a breath, drawn slowly, patiently, as if waiting for someone to remember her name.